Welcome to Happy Trooper's House of Haunts. In this episode, metallic finishes, Airbrush versus Graphite powder, build a Phantasm Sentinel if you dare.
Hey builders, Happy Trooper here with another spooktacular project. In this episode, we'll explore two different methods of applying a metallic finish to a 3D printed Sentinel from the Phantasm film franchise. I'll see how graphite powder stacks up against chrome paint applied with an airbrush. Both methods can be applied to any object that requires a metallic finish. Let's jump right into the build. The Sentinel STL is available for free on Thingiverse.com. You can print the entire orb as a single piece, or use the designer's pre-split STLs. I printed two orbs, one as a single piece, and the other I split in half using Mesh Mixer just for fun. I recommend printing the orb as one piece if your printer allows for it. It is challenging to align and fill two halves of the orb. For the stand, I used an STL from a Pokemon ball kit, also available for free on Thingiverse. I sized it down to 96%. After printing, I sanded down all of the ridges with 120 grit sandpaper. Sanding twigs and needle files are helpful in tight areas. I followed up with 220 grit sandpaper to begin the smoothing process. Prior to applying filler, I used some compressed air and rubbing alcohol to clean off the sanding debris. You can take your pick from the common 3D print fillers, plastic wood, Bondo spot putty, or a two-part filler like Ecstasy 3D or UV resin. Let's talk about fillers for a moment. I like to use wood filler putty when I have large objects to cover. It is inexpensive, dries in an acceptable amount of time, and it's very easy to sand down. I like to use Bondo spot putty for touch-ups and smaller objects. It dries in under 30 minutes. I have found that two-part fillers are great on round objects such as orbs and helmets. It seems to do a better job filling the steps produced by the layers. Plastic wood and spot putty will work, but may require multiple applications to remove the imperfections. Two-part fillers take a little longer to prep and dry, however, I feel that they are second to none when filling in rounded objects. First, I applied Ecstasy 3D to the drill bit using a small synthetic brush. Then I applied the epoxy to one half of the orb using a foam brush. When the epoxy has cured, apply more Ecstasy 3D to the other half of the orb. I also used Ecstasy 3D on the stand. For the Sentinel blades, I used Bondo spot putty thinned with acetone nail polish remover. Thin Bondo is easy to brush on in thin layers to get adequate surface coverage. I chose not to use Ecstasy 3D on the blades because the epoxy would stick to the table surface and possibly build up between the spaces of the blade, resulting in difficult trimming and sanding. Once all of the components have dried, sand everything with 220 grit sandpaper, followed by 320 or 400 grit sandpaper. After all of that sanding, it's a good idea to clean off the debris with compressed air. Any residual oils can be removed with some microfiber cloth and rubbing alcohol. Now is a great time to test fit the blades into the orb. Additional sanding was required to insert the blades. It's best to fit everything now. If you wait until after painting, you risk damaging the finish. Once you've confirmed the fit of the blades, Wrap a small layer of tape on the ends to ensure the layers of paint do not ruin the fitment. I like to use improvised handles whenever I'm painting. For the Sentinel blades, I used clothespins. For the stand, I used hot glue to fasten popsicle sticks to the bottom. Not only did this create multiple handles, but it kept the object off of the surface while the paint dries. For the Sentinel orb, I used a tongue depressor popsicle stick, trimmed and wrapped with a layer of friction tape. Now that the objects have been cleaned and prepped, we can hit the paint booth. I will start with some filler primer. I applied 3 light coats, waiting 5 to 10 minutes between coats. If the filler primer is applied in thick coats, drying can be a challenge. I typically wait 4 hours after the third and final primer coat. Filler primer is thick and generally has a textured finish. To smooth things out, soak some 400 or 600 grit sandpaper in some water. Spray the objects with water. Gently sand the objects using vertical and horizontal strokes. The objective here is to smooth the surface while minimizing removal of the primer. Circular sanding strokes may remove too much primer, exposing the surface of the object. Until now, the preparations for a graphite powder and an airbrush finish have been the same. First, we'll take a stab at a graphite powder finish. Let's see which base color will look best under the graphite powder. I coated some test spoons with gloss white, gloss gray, and gloss black. Next, I applied some graphite powder to all 3 spoons using a cotton ball. I prefer using a makeup sponge for applying graphite powder. However, cotton balls will also work. Just for fun, I did try some rub and buff on top of a flat black test spoon and a silver metallic test spoon. I wasn't pleased with the results, so I passed on the rub and buff. The spoon on the left is Spastix Mirror Chrome airbrushed over gloss black. The next spoon is graphite powder over white gloss. The spoon after that is graphite powder over gray gloss. And the final spoon is graphite powder over gloss black. The Phantasm Sentinel seen in the film is a bright, reflective chrome. When looking at the spoon test, the white gloss provided the brightest reflective finish. The gloss black with graphite powder looks good, but in this case it is a bit too dark. So I will use gloss white as the base coat for the graphite powder. I chose to use Rust-Oleum Stops Rust enamel in gloss white for the graphite powder base coat. I applied 3 light coats, waiting 10 minutes between each coat. After 5 days, I applied 3 light coats of Rust-Oleum Stops Rust crystal clear enamel, waiting 5 minutes between coats. If your clear coat has any blemishes, don't despair. Check out my other video on getting the most out of your clear coat. When applying metallic finishes, your base coat and clear coat need to be as near flawless as possible. The clear coat provides protection and some wiggle room to apply any corrections, such as wet sanding, compounding, and polishing. Here's how our Sentinel looks after a white gloss coat and a clear coat. Before jumping into graphite powder, the drill bit needs some attention. It's near impossible to blend graphite into the spiral space between the drill blades. I opted to fill in those spaces with some black acrylic paint. It wipes off very easily. Allow the acrylic paint to dry thoroughly. It can cause unsightly smears if it gets caught between the white gloss and graphite powder. Now the moment we've all been waiting for, applying that metallic finish. I recommend using a respirator while working with graphite powder. It's very fine, and it gets everywhere, including your lungs. Ensure that your spray paint has had ample time to cure. If the paint is still soft, you may ruin your nice glossy finish. Using a cotton ball or makeup applicator, start rubbing some graphite powder into the clear coat. Keep applying graphite powder and rubbing it in until you see a nice reflective finish. It took me about 30 minutes to get a decent finish. Let's switch gears and see what we can dig up on Spastix Mirror Chrome. For the base coat, I will be applying Rust-Oleum Lacquer in Gloss Black. I feel that lacquer is a little easier to apply as each layer melts into the previous layer. It is prone to runs if it is applied too thick. You may want to practice on some scrap plastic before applying to your Sentinel. I applied 2 coats of Gloss Black, waiting 10 minutes between coats. I usually apply 3 color coats. In this instance, I was pleased with the coverage and finish after 2 coats. After 24 hours, I applied 2 coats of Rust-Oleum Lacquer in Gloss Clear. I waited 10 minutes between the 2 coats. I allowed the Sentinel to sit for 5 days. Next, I applied some Spastix Mirror Chrome with a Posh H airbrush. I used the medium-sized needle with a compressor setting of 15 psi. After 24 hours, I gently wiped off the Sentinel with a microfiber towel. There's one more object that requires a finish, the stand. I painted the stand with 3 coats of flat black enamel spray paint, waiting 10 minutes between coats. This too was left for a few days to cure. This next step is optional. If you are willing to put in a little more effort, you can give the stand a nice faux gunmetal finish. I went over the stand with very fine steel wool to create some abrasions. Next, I applied some graphite powder with a makeup sponge. After some blending with the applicator, you'll see a subtle gunmetal finish peek through. You can apply a bit of protection to the stand by misting on some clear satin spray. While the satin clear is still a little wet, you can blend in a little more graphite powder and then mist some more clear on. It isn't a rock-solid clear coat, but it does help keep the graphite powder in place. I would avoid touching the stand with greasy fingers. I've used this on a few other props with great success. Let's take a look at our Sentinels now. this stage in the project, the Sentinels will look their best. However, touching the objects without wearing gloves may produce fingerprints that are next to impossible to remove. If the Sentinel will not be handled, you can stop here. If you'd like to add a little protection, keep watching. One of the easiest methods to protect spastics is to apply 2 light coats of Quickshine floor finish. Using a flat 3/4 inch synthetic brush, apply Quickshine using light and steady strokes. Have a paper towel on hand in case you need to wick off any drips. Allow the first coat to dry 1 hour, then apply a second coat. The clear coat will mute the finish slightly. Let's compare Sentinels with and without a clear coat. Quickshine is not recommended for protecting graphite powder finishes. It will take away the reflection and turn the object dark gray. That's it for this episode. Thank you for watching. See you next time.